Hi guys, it's me again. Would you believe that it's Friday, it's 1 o'clock. I've been in Scotland for the last 7 days where it has been nice and sunny, not raining as it is down here. But as Miss Sturgeon has decided that there's no alcohol there, I needed to come back down south fairly rapidly. I am only joking. I have yet again forgotten to bring my coffee into the room, so I apologise for that. And we have an amazing guest speaker with us today, Elizabeth Roberts. Unfortunately, you can't see her image, but actually that plays into the topic that we're discussing today, which is talking about multiple stakeholders and the cultural requirements of working with multiple stakeholders. As those of you that know ELS well, you'll know that we've worked all over the world and are very aware of this as an issue. But Elizabeth comes from a different background to mine and has probably quite a different perspective on it. So I'm really, really glad to welcome her. I'm just going to ask Becky if she can just click on, please, one slide. And we'll throw open the conversation. As you can see, Elizabeth's wearing camouflage, so one would assume she's from the military. So how's your input into this whole understanding of stakeholder management and indeed culture, Elizabeth?
Well, hi, Kath. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and it's lovely to join you this lunchtime. Hopefully you can hear me, if not see me.
I can.
As you can see, yes, I am wearing a uniform. Thank you. That's good. And yes, you're right. I am wearing a uniform, and it wasn't fancy dress. I am in the army, and I suppose it's awful to admit I'm in the Royal Signals, so being on video shouldn't be an issue really. But here we are. So anyway. But no, it's delightful to be here. Basically, I'm sort of today from several months or so, where I'm currently very fortunate to work in the head office of the Ministry of Defence, and I've been part of a really special team in ceremonial and honours, basically where we lay on all the commemorations, the national commemorations that people get to see on television or participate in usually. And what's been particularly fascinating is having come from a culture where it's been very much most of the time, for 2 years or so now in the military, where most of the time you are primarily dealing with internal military stakeholders, albeit across the three services perhaps. This job has really been about working with external stakeholders and at a national level. And of course against the background of COVID, so it's been working with people like the BBC and the British Legion and Royal Parks, Westminster Abbey at one point until COVID took over, and the National Memorial Arboretum. And of course every single organisation, as you must say every day, has a different culture and a different way of working. And that has been really fascinating for me.
Yeah, and I guess it's not just that they've got a different culture, but they've also got different things, almost red lines, things that they won't do, and things that they're very comfortable in doing. And I suspect that's also true of your own organisation.
Yes, definitely. And I think probably I suppose an obvious one for me that comes to mind is even just the level of discussion, because within the military, people will be very sensitive to security classifications and what they're discussing, but they're also equipped internally with the means to discuss things, obviously in a secure way, whether it's voice or otherwise. Whereas when you're dealing with external stakeholders, and indeed external stakeholders that are very used to regularly dealing with big national events, but using platforms such as Zoom or Google Meets or Teams, that even that at a very basic level creates for very interesting meetings, because you will have somebody in the military getting very excited, whereas you're thinking, gosh, you should have had the last meeting that you weren't on, and also gosh, government, because other government departments also behave very differently. And just, and the way people address each other, the terminology, acronyms, what they mean. And of course, for me, this is against the context of the fact that we're not all sitting in the same room making eye contact with each other.
Absolutely.
We're basically geographically far apart.
And I think that makes a real difference. I remember a long time ago working in a hierarchical organisation, and a gentleman came in jeans and a t-shirt. And my boss was quite senior in our organization and was very traditional. So he was in a suit. And this individual walked in, sat down late, sat down, didn't introduce himself. And I could feel my boss bristle next to me. And this is in a face-to-face room. I could feel him bristling. And my boss then proceeded to ignore him the whole meeting because he was late and he was inappropriately dressed as far as he was concerned. And at the end of the meeting, we were going around the room just to do the final any other business and wrap-ups, etc. And we got to this gentleman and he explained who he was at that point. And he was the senior stakeholder for the project we were working on and the gatekeeper for the funding. So he was absolutely somebody we needed on side. But we hadn't kept him on side because of the way that he'd been dismissed because of his dress, his manner. And that was absolutely fascinating because the cultural norms of the organization I was working with just didn't accept what they saw in front of them. He was too young, he was dressed too inappropriately, and of all things, he was late to the meeting. And I think that that's a challenge on occasions with cultures when you're talking in a virtual world, because people come in late or they've got an IT problem. I think the biggest phrase is going to be, I can't hear you, you're on mute. I think that's going to be the best known phrase of the year this year. And I think
it's a really interesting point.
Yeah, and I guess also for what you've been doing, it's more than just different cultures of the organization. It's also potentially, and I'd be interested in your thinking on this, potentially how people think about the actual event that you are organizing. So if you are a veteran, you might have a very different view to if you are somebody from the BBC and normally broadcasting in this space. You might have a different view of what's appropriate and what's not. Has that been a challenge?
Yeah, I'd actually scribbled down a note about that, about expectations as well. And I think, if I was to use the Victory over Japan 75 experience, what was interesting about that is all the veterans that fought in the Far East have felt for many, many years that they were the forgotten army and the forgotten fleet. And actually, it's only been in recent times that they've begun to feel any real acknowledgement at all. So this was building up to be a really big year, and there was an agenda that it would be as big as VE 75 Victory in Europe. And of course, then COVID arrives. Veterans clearly fall into that category of shielding at home more so than others. And so suddenly you go from visions where, you're going to have thousands, or certainly for VJ, hundreds of veterans together and doing things in a certain way, and also ticking off lots of boxes, because you're right, you've got the veterans, you've got perhaps an organisation like the Legion that has I suppose a way of working that again, their stakeholders expect, veterans expect things to be done in a certain way. You've got, but that was the thing with COVID. I feel like it forced everybody to have to change. And in some ways, that was a good thing as well, because you're right, everybody had expectations, and COVID suddenly risked stopping this commemoration. Most of them are so old, unfortunately, that we probably won't see, they won't be around for the next big anniversary. So it had to be important. So to fight through managing expectations, the emotional aspect because of the situation we're talking about and the people involved, and also competing agendas, which not suggesting any of them were the wrong agendas, but as you touched on, every stakeholder has a different objective that they need to achieve. To balance all of those and to come out with one joined up product, you're right, it was very difficult. And again, as you say, you're doing it against the backdrop of all being geographically displaced, people sitting on bedroom floors or kitchen tables or in that little office, people, as you say, either being on mute or dropping out of the call at the wrong moment, all those things, but yet somehow overcoming that because we were forced to. And I just feel if someone had said a year ago, we're going to do it this way just because we should prove we can, I don't think it would have achieved the same positive result. But I think it's almost great because
it's almost that innovation brought about by necessity, isn't it? It's a very difficult situation so we've seen a lot of innovation in this space because there has been no option. And I've been tracking with interest what people are saying about the 11th of November and the commemorations around November and what we'll do then. And you know, with interest, because it's not yet clear. I mean, it probably is at your end, but it isn't yet clear from the rest of the population.
No, I'm smiling. You can't. This is the thing, because we're not on video. You can't see my smiley face. Yeah. And I think, yeah, you're right. I mean, that. And again, you're right. And people, I suppose, yeah, people like expect things like that to be decided by now, but the reality is it's not. And you have to get buy-in from ministers. It's got to fit in with the current agenda, which is also overlaid at the moment with, well, what's the COVID picture right now? What's going to be acceptable? You've got
and presumably you also have to,
the BBC.
Yeah, and liaise, I assume, with the royal family. So, you know, because they have a big part usually in this. So it's not just, you know, the moving part that's called the MOD is difficult enough, but to then bring in the royals as well is, you know, an additional challenge. So are you using any formal project management tools? I mean, do you sit down and do, you know, a RACI? Do you sit down and do a communication plan? Are you doing it, you know, in any formalized way, or is it, you know, we do this in operational planning so we know what we're up to? What's the process?
So, you know, this is me being very sort of just honest and open, that it's definitely, I think anywhere else I would have worked internally, militarily, yes, it would have been exactly that. Again, with this adaptive, and I would say probably, revolution rather than evolution with this, because everyone was having to adapt to new tools as well, and online remote working, and somebody being able to access softwares all in different versions of laptops and Windows. You're right, it probably wasn't done in the most I suppose, you know, what on paper would be the right way to do it, but but we made sure that we did manage it. And I suppose the other thing was DCMS, the Department of Culture, Media, Sport, was actually the government, cross-government lead. The MOD wasn't the lead stakeholder, and yet the MOD had probably the lion's share by far part to play. So again, you've got to sort of gingerly stretch through that, because you don't own the programme. But you're right. So internally, we did have our projects, we had our terms of reference structures, and our comms team, the defence comms team, they have a very swept up comms plan. But that's the thing, they particularly with VE, actually, they put a lot of work into that. But then if you get told, actually, this department's now leading, how do you make sure that all that work that's been put in doesn't get lost, but you now have to impose it on another culture without treading on their toes? And a lot of it comes down to resource, of course, as well, because some people aren't resourced. So you are there seeing how it should be done and could be done, and you are able to do it, but you've got to make sure that you don't leave other stakeholders behind. And so sometimes you, I think, have to adapt and soften your approach, and not, you know, yes, show that you've got a plan, but make it look a little bit more I don't know, less, I suppose, austere to people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, you're not taking over, because that's the worst, isn't it? Yeah. And again, it's interesting you mentioned this. So my daughter used to work for a certain area of the Ministry of Defence, not in the Ministry of Defence, but external to it. And she was arranging events for things such as Armed Forces Day, which of course falls at a weekend. So she was a civilian. She's never been in the military. She's not a civil servant. She worked at the time for an organisation that was related to. But trying to get people, military organisations, units, to want to take part in Armed Forces Day, which of course is a celebration of all of the work that the armed forces do with the civilian population, is quite a difficult ask when it's weekend, because most people don't want to necessarily do a whatever over a weekend, because they'll have to do all the practices, etc., etc. So the rehearsals. So that, you know, that also is going to be quite interesting if we take the next big event. You know, normally there's massive, you know, the Horse Guards are involved, aren't they? There's a massive service in Westminster Abbey. There's the Remembrance Walk Past. There's so much that goes on, and all of that's going to have to be rearranged because of the COVID situation. So, you know, we've got up in Harwell, which is where we are. They took off for the D-Day. The Pegasus took off from Harwell during World War II. So we always have a commemoration in June, which this year was a very, very different commemoration. And it's just run by the Legion and the local councils. It's not a nationwide one, but a lot of people come to it. And it's, it was fascinating, the difference. And they did a really, really good video. But was everybody who wanted to be involved because it was a video? And that's the challenge, isn't it? It's making sure that all of the stakeholders, identifying them first, and then figuring out what their communications means are. So that whole, background of let's do a RACI, let's do a communication plan based on the RACI, what they can and can't see. I think you probably have to do it, but as you say, without wanting to take over because you're military. It's a real challenge, I suspect. Have you
Yes.
enjoyed it? Has it been good fun?
Yeah, I've loved it, Kath. It's been a real highlight, I would say, of my career. Another highlight would be training recruits. I think that's a
Yeah.
real privilege to have. But this has been so different, and yeah, very few people get the opportunity to do it. It's a very small team. I think that's the other thing is, the reality is, of course, there are, operations all over the world. There's so many other things that are going on, but equally, and in fact it came up on a team conversation this morning, whilst other areas within the portfolio that we sit in, they may be talking about great strategic planning and things that really are I suppose sound much in some ways very different and a lot more, I suppose, military focused. The reality is that this is of course so important, and it produces a really tangible output and response as well. Yesterday it was a naming ceremony at the Arboretum in Staffordshire for families who lost troops in conflicts last year. So there's on duty last year. So there's very tender, soft and painful moments, and it's making those special ones. But often, as you say, although it's the Ministry of Defence, the reality there are other stakeholders that actually have a bigger part to play. And I feel, for me personally, I always find it helpful to you've got to try and make sure you stay military, but language and work to them and adapt their tone as well. I think I start with name and that's it. Kath, whatever. Am I dropping out there?
You were a little bit.
Can you hear me?
We've got you back
Sorry.
again, I think.
Is that okay?
No, don't worry.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, no, sorry. Things like emails.
Oh, you've gone into a tunnel again. I think you were going to say that depending on the communication means, you change your tone. Hello?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Hello,
So
I'm here. I'm here. Can you hear? Sorry. Yeah.
So this week is Learning at Work Week, which I always find interesting when it comes to people in the military, because obviously a large amount of their time is spent in training, and you've just referenced another role that you've had, which was delivering training to recruits. But Learning at Work Week, it gives us the opportunity to reflect on what we've learned and maybe do things differently. So reflecting, I mean, you've been doing this for a reasonable amount of time now, reflecting on what you've learned on it. What would be the key transferable things that you think that you've got from it, and where you think you could have done it differently now looking back on it?
Sorry, can you still hear me, Kath?
I can indeed.
Can. Lovely, good. Yeah, sorry, could you just, you were just
so I was just
reflecting
saying,
back on previous experiences.
So I was just saying, reflecting back on the experience in this role, is there anything that you have gone, actually I could have done that differently, you personally? So the reflecting on the lessons that you've internally learned from it.
Yeah, I suppose it's, I don't know, it's one of these jobs where I've genuinely enjoyed it, and it has just sort of been a pleasure working with everybody. I think certainly one of the things that I would make sure I always do from it is, from the outset, is make time to meet with every stakeholder, even if it can't be face to face, and make sure you allow time on, if it is a conference call, actually make sure there is a little bit of time just to have a bit of chat and preamble, because you have got to build a relationship, and just launching into your Zoom meeting with 20 people on it doesn't allow for that. So you've got to make
Oh, I think we've lost her again.
you speak to them one-on-one. Oh
Yeah.
no,
No, you're back again. So I think
I
that
don't know
what you're
what to do
describing,
here. Can you hear me
no, don't
now?
worry. I think that
Sorry.
what you're describing is what we would traditionally call you're losing the informal learning or the informal water closet. No, water closet, that's a toilet. Water fountain moment. So you're not getting the opportunity to go and have a
Yes.
chat over coffee before the start, or even if it's a follow-on meeting, you're not able to pick up on all of those informal conversations you would have quite routinely. And I think that that's the big negative, I think, on virtual. And I think that what you've described is just giving yourself time for that. So sometimes the time that we've gained back in having virtual needs to go again because of all of that team building. You know, it's almost the Tuckman piece. I don't know if you know about Tuckman. He's the guy that talks about storming, norming, performing. You know, it's almost making that team virtually work as well.
Yes, yeah, no, I think it's exactly that. And I think it's the difference between that and then when you go on to the meeting, even if you've just had chance to get to know a little bit about where they're living, you know, where they're working from at the moment, what are they doing this weekend? I think everybody's on the same page then in terms of irrespective of what they're wearing, irrespective of their organisation, you've all found your common ground as human beings. I think that's the key bit.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. And you know, undoubtedly 2020 is going to be one of those years that we all remember, maybe for all the wrong reasons, but for some also the positive reasons. So I suspect that for some that they feel that the events that you've been able to organise have been very inclusive, and that's been very positive for them too.
It's a really good point, Kath. I think again the irony is in a way COVID-19 could be thanked for such a positive outcome because although fewer veterans were able to be, for example, at the Arboretum, and we also did a big filming production at Horse Guards Parade with only one veteran physically present, many more actually were able to engage with it because it was on television, it was broadcast, and so people that couldn't have been there normally and would have missed out altogether got to see a polished product that was put together for them to enjoy in the comfort of their own home. And so I would suggest on this occasion we found ways to make it even better than the original plan.
Yeah, and maybe that's because in an emergency you have to start thinking outside the box, because we've always been able to do that, but we've always traditionally done big events, so it's thinking outside the box, isn't it? Yeah, I was watching,
and also being heard, but getting people to actually accept the thinking outside the box rather than, you know, pat you on the head and say that's lovely, not on my watch.
Yeah, I was watching, I don't know if you saw it, but I was watching David Attenborough and Prince William talk with the children about environmental issues. I thought, how canny, because you know, having the three children talk meant it was far more inclusive again, and it of course got far more publicity. And sometimes we forget that type of thing is also important, so that more people are aware of the issue. You know, we remember for lots of different reasons, but also one of them must be, I would assume, to not go there again. And that is, you know, that means you've got to do the whole education piece as well as the commemoration piece. And that's quite different, I suspect.
Yes.
Yeah. And, you know, the poor BBC.
It is, you're right. And
the poor BBC have really struggled with, you know, all of their work, you know, across the whole broadcasting organisation, but again, have pulled it out of the hat with regards to the way that they are now delivering product, which, you know, is fairly amazing. It's back to the speed of innovation, which, you know, I think it's impressive, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, we were very fortunate to work with the BBC Studios, Claire Popperwell, their director, and she's won many BAFTAs now, but, you know, it's that creativity. It's how do we keep it authentic, tasteful, reflective, but as you say, it's the education bit as well. But I think, as you say, it's also, that's, you mentioned about the royal family. Yes, you have the royal family, you might have the Prime Minister, you might have senior ministers of state and senior officers and other dignitaries, but actually it's remembering that on this occasion they're not the most important people.
Indeed. Yeah,
it's not their voice that people need to hear. Mm.
Well, can I just say, from us to you, thank you so much for the work that you've been doing, because you say that you've got a lot out of it, but I suspect a lot of people that have been watching the events that you've been organising and part of have got an awful lot out of them as well. So thank you so much for doing that, because I know it's a job, but it's more than that for most people that serve in uniform. So thank you for your input onto it, and thank you for joining us today. Really interesting conversation. I'm really grateful. Guys and girls,
Thank you, Kat.
no, thank you. Guys and girls, next week, as normal, completely different area. We've had really two on the trot talking about reflection on different events and reflection on the way that we're working. Next week, we're going to be talking with Paul Matthews again. I'm very excited that he's agreed to join us again. The topic that he wants to talk about is the real purpose of training, which I'm sure will be fascinating. He has written extensively, as I know you know, on informal learning, capability at work, and learning transfer at work. But his specific topic that he wants to talk about next week is the real purpose of training, which I'm really excited about and looking forward to. Elizabeth, I think you're still there. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm really grateful, and hopefully we'll catch up again at some stage soon, if not over the virtual lines, for a proper coffee and a catch up.
Great.
Speak soon.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone. Bye now. Bye.
Bye.